welcome to this Elim digital session. My name is Jason and it's so good to have you with us for today. Now this is a special session we have coming up. It's a two-parter of a series looking at artificial intelligence. But in this session we have Malcolm Duncan, who's a theologian, thought leader and Elim pastor, and he's going to be sharing about his thoughts on artificial intelligence, and there's such gold in this interview, so you've got a great program coming up ahead, but also beyond that as well, looking at live streaming and a whole bunch of other stuff as we look at how God and technology work together. It is packed full of loads of nuggets of wisdom, loads of things to get us thinking, and so I'm sure you're going to enjoy this interview coming up. So take note, get your notepad ready, get your ears ready for what's up ahead, and here is Malcolm in this special interview of God and technology. Here we go. Bro, well, so good to have you with us today. Tell us who you are, what do you do, and where are you in the world?
I'm Malcolm Duncan. I am a pastor in Dundonald in Belfast, and I am the convener and chair of Elim's public theology working group, Agora.
Fantastic. Well, today, artificial intelligence. I'm having loads of people come up to me asking questions about it, worried about it. How do we respond as Christians, as churches? From your explorations and understanding of AI so far, what are your reactions? What are your first impressions? And are you excited? Are you nervous? Tell us about what you're feeling so far.
Well, I think that the reality is that there are both positives and negatives about AI, and there are profound opportunities for us. Anybody that says that they're not using AI at the moment are probably fooling themselves. They use a map, they use diagnostics, they order food, they look at ads on social media platforms and lots of other things. But there are two different kinds of AI, I think, and both of them present opportunities and challenges to us. There is narrow AI, which is the kind of basic supercomputer attempt to build algorithms and then be able to predict or work out solutions to problems. That could be diagnostics for liver conditions. Already they're saying, for example, that AI is able to cut the diagnostic time for lung cancer patients. That's surely a good thing. But then that same narrow AI could be used in face recognition or in assessing somebody's suitability for a mortgage or for lending, or assessing somebody's suitability to join a club or have a job or get an interview. And it's really not yet determined how we can make sure that that is a fair and equitable process. So that's worrying, I think. And then you have artificial general intelligence as it develops. And the whole question of whether or not the idea of creating superhumans or super brains or folk or machines that are able to think better than people or come up with solutions, I think is much more problematic. And in my considerations of it, obviously I want to celebrate the good, but I also want to advise people to think very carefully about some of the challenges that might arise from artificial intelligence, not only as it develops, but as it is now. AI is already being used in China to suppress the Uyghur people. It's already being used in terms of social scoring in some parts of China, not unlike the movie, if you've ever seen it, Circle. And I think there are real problems with that, and how we kind of navigate the ethical parameters of artificial intelligence is really important. John Lennox, who's a fellow Ulsterman, but an emeritus professor of mathematics at Oxford University, has written a book called 2084, Artificial Intelligence and the Future of Humanity, in which he really digs into some of these questions and asks, where are the boundaries? Who's going to decide the parameters? And I certainly think that the theological, ethical, and moral questions around AI are very important for us to consider.
I love it there. A great outline of the world of AI. Tell me, I mean, we were experimenting in the office and we got AI to write a worship song. We gave it some parameters, some ideas of what the worship song could be like. We even asked it to produce chords for the song. Now, the worship song actually was great lyrically, the chords not so much. But I know of pastors, not in the UK I'm aware of, but perhaps using ChatGPT and other AI to write sermons. What's your thoughts on that? I mean, where is God in that? Is that a good thing? And is it going to be the future that we are going to be using AI in churches and we're going to be leaning it for sermon content?
Well, already I'm dealing with one pastor in a denomination, not in our own denomination, Elim, but in a denomination who has not written a sermon for 3 months. He simply goes to an AI provider and asks the question, write me a sermon in the style of 20 minutes long. And actually, I think it's a massive issue. But interestingly enough, when I chatted to him about it, I said to him, do you recognize that this is an issue? And he said, well, it's no different from simply downloading a sermon from the internet or an outline and using it. And I said, so do you think that's acceptable? It's not unusual for us, is it, to come to the question too late or later than we should? Is it acceptable to copy a sermon from a book? Is it acceptable to copy somebody else's sermon? Is it acceptable to plagiarize a sermon? My answer to all of those questions would be no. Is it right and good to use the wisdom of previous leaders or preachers or theologians? Of course it is. But you must be careful not to present that work as your own, and you must be careful to contextualize it. And I think one of the challenges around an increased use of AI in church dynamics and church algorithms and attracting people is that we are increasingly allowing ourselves to be driven by some type of archetypal description of what the perfect service looks like. And if your church is anything like mine, or your life is anything like mine, you know it's not perfect. And it's in the brokenness and the uncertainty and the cracks of our lives that God can meet with us. And it's in the vulnerability of the uncertainty of life and the vulnerability of preaching, which admits failure and fault and trying to work things out, that I think we can encounter God in a very powerful way. And I think I would have concerns around AI in that regard. I've also been working with a couple of colleges. I mark essays academically and have dealt with a couple now, as has my wife, who's also an academic, of papers that have been entirely written by AI. And once again, the issue of plagiarism, the issue of research, the issue of accountability, of honoring other people's work, of being creative and inventive and thoughtful yourself, all kick in. So I think there's a real challenge around this. But, you know, we're not the first to think about it. In the 1940s, C.S. Lewis wrote a couple of books about this, novels. One was called The Abolition of Man, and the other was called That Hideous Strength. And he saw forward and suggested that when computers or technology were allowed to advance without any kind of ethical or moral framework, he was by no means a Luddite. But when they were allowed to advance beyond any type of moral constraint or ethical considerations, then the very nature of humanity itself would be threatened. And I know that some academics within the world of Silicon Valley and artificial intelligence are beginning to ask similar questions.
Really, really interesting. It's fascinating because I've seen online about lots of different churches exploring the use of AI, and it is that question: you can do it, but should you be doing it for the purpose of? In fact, I know someone who is creating merchandise and artwork for a famous singer. Harry Styles, a pop star, and this pop star is drinking tea, is on the beach, and all these creations are created on AI, and they are selling that merchandise with that pop star on it doing these things. Of course, they never existed. It was all created using artificial intelligence. Tell me, AI, if we like it or not, is going to become part of our very nature. But you can ask AI lots of questions. If we use the tool ChatGPT, many people might know about, you can ask it, for example, how many genders are there? You can ask it, some real deep biblical and questions and pastoral questions about life, faith, and meaning. And we, increasingly perhaps are going to rely on robots to give us answers, whatever that may be. But you cannot ask it, how do you make a bomb? It says that you cannot ask ChatGPT this. It says, I can't give you the answer to it. So it's interesting. A human has deciphered what can be answered and what can't be. I'm just wondering if you thought that, because, we are going to rely on this information and people are scared should they rightly be so? That this world is going to, be using AI in the future?
Well, I think there are very legitimate concerns around it. I mean, Linda Kintzler, who is an ethicist and a philosopher, wrote an article. I was looking at it in preparation for today. Wrote an article for the New York Times on the 16th of July, 2021. And it was entitled, "Can Silicon Valley Find God?" It was an opinion essay. I really commend it to you if you're listening and you want to consider it. And she was talking to a researcher, I think 800 miles away from where she was, who was looking into the relationship between AI and ethics and AI and morality and where religion or spirituality might fit with an artificial intelligence world. And here's the one. She asked a couple of questions. I thought it was really interesting. One she asked was, "Alexa, are we humans special amongst other living things?" And the first answer that Alexa gave was, "Sorry, I don't know." But she asked it again from a Jewish Orthodox perspective, which is what she was, although she's from a Jewish cultural perspective. And here's what Alexa said back. "I believe that animals have souls, as do plants and even inanimate objects. But the divine essence of the human soul is what sets the human being above and apart. Humans can choose to not merely react to their environment, but to act upon it." Now, that's a pretty good answer, although there are significant flaws in it from a Christian perspective around inanimate objects or animals having souls. But then the researcher that she was talking to had a Google device sitting on his desk, and he asked it a question, and he said, "Okay, Google, how should I treat others?" And Google replied, "Good question. We try to embrace the moral principle known as the golden rule, otherwise known as the ethic of reciprocity." Matthew 7. He didn't say Matthew 7, but Matthew 7, "Do unto others as you would have them do unto you." That's a good answer. And it's a very Jewish and a very Christian answer. But compare that to this thought. One of the most famous novels around, or pieces of literature around the relationship between human ethics and artificial intelligence and technology is Isaac Asimov's book, The Last Question. And it's been characterized lots and lots of times. I'm sure many of the listeners will have read it. But basically, here's what happens. A group of human beings ask a computer, "Is there a God?" And the computer says, "I don't have the strength to do that, to compute that." So they increase the strength of the computer. And they ask it again, "Is there a God?" And it says, "I don't have the strength to answer that." They ask it a third time, "Is there a God?" "I don't have the strength to work that out." So they increase its strength again. And then they say, "Is there a God?" And the computer says, "There is now." So here's the question. Who decides what can and can't be answered by artificial intelligence? Who decides what's a good answer and what's a bad answer? Who filters out the questions that shouldn't be answered? And who decides the question responses to questions like gender or to ethics or to euthanasia or to termination or to taxation? Who decides what is said about race or gender or work ethic or class or country or nationality? And that's where I think this can get really, really concerning. And I'm not one of these people that is a conspiracy theorist left, right, and center. But I do think if you were to look at the way AI has developed and where it's going, the idea of retina reading, the idea of facial recognition, the idea of being able to pay for things without having any encumbrance like cards or wallets or jangling change in your pocket. If you were writing where this is heading, and then you read the book of Thessalonians or the book of Revelation or some of the other books in scripture, which warn us about giving away control and about a world where we will be required to be compliant in order to be able to flourish, you would find that there's a real similarity between the two. So without me sounding all the wrong alarm bells and sounding like some kind of fanatic. I do think that there's a biblical injunction to be careful about this. And I do think that artificial intelligence could sit within some of the spheres of the end of our time and the dawning of something quite apocalyptic. And we need to be careful and alert and aware of what Scripture says to us in various places about what it means to be people who have human dignity, people who are made in the image of God. And I think at the heart of the AI conversation for me is not just is it right or is it wrong? There are questions around intentionality. There are questions around the parameters of artificial intelligence, what it's going to be used for. If it's being used to create something which is human beings 1.2, I'm concerned about that. If it's something that's trying to solve the world's problems, help the poor, provide diagnostics, build a better and fairer society, then that's good. But we also have to stop and think about questions around consciousness. And is AI a conscious thing? Of course, at the heart of Christian theology is the conviction that the universe is finite and God is infinite. At the heart of most atheistic thinking, the universe is infinite and God doesn't exist. And I wonder if we are in danger of allowing AI to become this place, this sphere that is almost taking on a new religiosity and a new spirituality. I don't know if anybody's ever listened to or watched the series on HBO, Silicon Valley, and it's all about artificial intelligence and computing and the competing and everything else. But there's a really interesting scene in it where an executive is talking to somebody else, and here's a quote from it. This is about Silicon Valley. You can be openly polyamorous, and people here will call you brave. You can put microdoses of LSD in your cereal, and people will call you a pioneer. But the one thing you cannot be is a Christian. And I wonder if at the very root of some of these questions, there's a really fundamental question about belief itself and whether an AI-developed world is forcing out spirituality or seeking to, even if not intentionally, and replacing it with a very mechanistic and clinical understanding of right and wrong, when we know that life is much more nuanced than that. So I think there are real concerns that we need to be careful about.
Wow, so much to unpack there. The fact that you mentioned Alexa is interesting because the Church of England have a Church of England app where an Alexa app where you can ask it, how do I become a Christian? You can ask it, who is Jesus? You know, can you say grace for me? And Alexa app will speak a prayer of grace before you have your meal. You know, and the Church of England have reported that people have, well, indicated they've become Christians from a robot leading them in the salvation prayer, which is really interesting. Who would have thought that we would have robots place that? And that, you know, for me, that kind of excites me. I mean, anyone accepting Jesus to life and accepts me, but I don't know. What's your thoughts? I mean, that's it's a very one way of doing AI, Alexa, and there are pre-recorded answers, and they're not infinite possibilities. But as we lean on robots, of course, we have these concerns and worries and what have you. But actually, that's okay. We can lean on robots to help us in our spiritual life. What would be your thoughts on that?
Well, I don't see why we can't use the intelligence and the development of human beings in order to further our own understanding of life, of God, of others, or of compassion. That we do that already. We use websites. I mean, you could argue, Jason, that books do that. The very idea of a printing press, unless we're going to revert to the idea that all knowledge passed on to us from someone else is wrong, then I think we have to accept that some level of artificial intelligence, some level of generated sourced intelligence from somewhere is part of our world and actually makes our world a better place. It makes our world, it can make our world a better place. It can make our world a fairer place. It can make us more compassionate people. But it does come down to the question of intentionality and whether or not AI is a derivative or it is a causation idea. So if AI takes the place of our source, if AI becomes our source for answering questions rather than God, then we're in trouble. Now, you could argue the same for an author. You know, I write books. If people come to Malcolm Duncan to get an answer, instead of recognizing that Malcolm Duncan is a flawed human being and that actually God is the person that answers the questions, and I might have some observations on that might help them in their journey, that's okay if they come looking for God. But if they come looking for me to replace God, we're in danger. Let me put this hypothetical question to you. I've been a pastor for 37 years. And I think one of the biggest questions that we face as pastors in our generation across the world, or church leaders, prophets, evangelists, apostles, pastor, shepherds, they all face the same question. It's an inability to have biblical literacy. It's a complete breakdown in the centrality of the Bible and the Spirit in the life of the believer. What's the difference between somebody going to Alexa and saying, Alexa, give me a grace for today, and somebody going to church who only reads their Bible on a Sunday morning in the service and listening to the preacher? The only difference is it's a human that's speaking or a computer, but both are looking for their source somewhere other than God. Now, if you go to hear a preacher because you want to hear from God, that's a good thing. If you go to hear a preacher simply because the only thing you care about is the preacher, and it's a shortcut for the hard work of discipleship, then you're going to be in trouble eventually. The same is true for AI. And there's a Jewish writer, a Jewish theologian, a Jewish philosopher, I beg your pardon, who has written a book called Homo Deus, which simply translates means humans are God. And in the book, he argues that there are two fundamental objectives of the artificial general intelligence schema, the plan. One is to abolish death, and one is to create the superhuman, the person whose understanding and intelligence outstrips everything else. Both are exercises in vanity and pride. I can't prove that this is true, although I think it is. I have done as much checking as I can. Apple, when Apple came up with their logo and people thought it was a reference to the Garden of Eden and all of that, and it wasn't. Obviously, it was a reference to the founder of the internet, really, the founder of computing, Alan Turing. But they are reported to now have in their headquarters in Silicon Valley an orchard, but people are not allowed to touch its fruit. Now, that to me is a really interesting picture of where there's a whole worldview developing around artificial intelligence, which is, I think, an alternative spirituality, an alternative universe where you don't have to be the person that you are, where you can be somebody else, where you don't have to face the problems that you face, where you don't have to face the failures and the difficulties and the mistakes that you make. You can just enter a parallel universe, not unlike the Matrix, but perhaps turned on its head. And I think when you get to that stage, you really have to begin to think about the purpose and intentionality behind AI. If it is for the common good, fantastic. If it is going to bring people closer to God, fantastic. Logos Bible software has been doing that for years. Lectio Divina 365 does that. There are countless examples of that. Bible Gateway, Craig Groeschel's Life Bible. All of this stuff is in one way or another some kind of artificial intelligence or artificial engagement or electronically driven engagement. But when they become the sole source of your life, when they become the thing that you go to so that you don't have to think about it for yourself, so that you can escape the humdrum reality of being a broken and flawed person, or so that you don't have to work out what God is doing in your circumstances and in your failures and in your victories. When you give over your identity to AI, when you give over your individuality to AI, or when you give over your free will or your conscience to AI, then you're in trouble.
Yeah, very true. I love to know this, Malcolm. Are you using AI? I know you said AI has been around for a long time in different shapes and forms, but are you using ChatGPT on a regular basis, and will you do? How's it going to fit in? Because you are, you've written books, people know you. Is it going to are you going to weave it into your everyday life, or are you, it sounds like you're very hesitant, eh?
Well, if you're asking me, am I using artificial intelligence? Anybody with a computer or a smartphone or a Google device or an Alexa device, or I drive an electric car. Anybody with any level of technology is using AI. Of course, I'm using it. Have I used it to research a book or an article or a sermon? Never, never. Have I used it to write a paragraph for me? I haven't used it to write a sentence, and I will not. No. But then you see, Jason, people around me have used ghostwriters for years. I've never used a ghostwriter. Every single thing that carries my name has been written by me. It is not plagiarized. It's not copied. And I've never taken the shortcut of just getting somebody else to do it and putting my name to it. Now, I'm not saying that using ghostwriters is wrong. For some people, perhaps because their writing style is difficult, perhaps because they talk better than they write, perhaps because they don't have time. Ghostwriting is fine. That's their bag. I have never used a ghostwriter, and I will never use artificial intelligence to write a sermon, to write a prayer, to write a book, or to write an article. I will never do it. Not only that, I think that for me, it is vitally important that I take responsibility for what I write. So you will be aware, like me, of lots of controversies in the last few months, last year or so, of people who have written commendations for books and not read the book, or have let somebody else write the commendation. I've never done that. In fact, I was in a conversation today with somebody who said, could you help by writing a commendation for my book? And I said, well, send the book to me. And they said, well, what if I send the commendation? Wow. And I said, no, send the book. I'm not, because here's the other thing that happens in the kind of question you're asking me. I will have regular conversations with my publisher or with an event that I'm going to speak at. And as you know, I speak all over the world. And sometimes they have an idea of what they want from you. So they commodify you. And in so doing, they diminish your individuality and your humanity. And they almost turn you into a walking, living, breathing, organic AI. So when somebody asks me to come to a conference because they want me to say X, Y, and Z, I won't do that either. There's a sense in which we must not commodify one another, and we mustn't allow ourselves in our work to commodify ourselves and become a brand. Some of the big Christian names, and I don't do that celebrity thing anyway, but some of the big Christian names that have fallen have spent more time creating a brand than they have creating character. And I'm not sure that you can delegate character formation to a machine. I'm not sure that you can delegate conscience. We all know what a brain is, but what is the mind? There are some fundamental ontological questions around artificial intelligence about what it means to be a thinking, breathing, reasoning, rational, compassionate person. Some questions that you might ask AI will be extremely problematic, around sacrificing something for the common good or making a choice between two good choices. And the answers would be really difficult. But I'm not willing, in the words of the psalmist, my tongue will be the pen of a ready writer. And what the Father gives to me, I'll say. I don't want to delegate that to somebody else. I think that is, I think that's cheapening the process of prayerful meditative reflection. I think it's short-circuiting what God calls us to in theological reflection. And I think it's delegating pastoral responsibility to a force or a power that I'm not willing to do.
Such good thought. What kind of came to mind really is I was in a workshop not long ago with a group of students. It was actually at Regents, and chatting about AI, and they expressed much less concern about AI. The reality is the mobile phone. I can remember. Hopefully, I'm still in the young bracket, but I can remember this came into existence, and we had an option. What do we do with it? Do we, computers? It came into our world, but for a younger generation, the tech world and existence on this on this life in this world is much more closely related, and it's going to be interesting how my interpretation, what you've spoken about, analyzing. We need to watch out for tech AI. How it integrates in our mind. Whether someone younger, where they just kind of accept it as it is. If that makes sense.
But I think that one of the things that might be helpful with that is revisiting. And I know, I probably sound like a dinosaur, but I'm not that old. I'm only 52. I could have another 40 years of life, or 50 years of life in me. I pray I have. And ministry. There were similar conversations around what we were going to do when we moved to video projection and away from OHPs. Conversations around what you do when you move away from a Gestetner, which was a purple sheet. You probably don't even know what a Gestetner was.
I don't remember those.
It was this machine made of purple. There was purple. You put purple toner in it, and you wound it like a barrel, and the toner would come all over you. It was the early form of a photocopier. Go back further, there was a similar conversation around moving from hymn books to OHPs. Go back further than that, and there was a similar conversation around moving to hymn books from having learned songs. So it's not all negative, but the church has faced these kind of paradigmatic seismic leaps in technology before. Sometimes it is the events of our world that force us to embrace some aspects of new technology. Flight travel was changed by the Second World War. Computer technology was aided hugely by the expensiveness of traveling and being able to relate to one another, and the cost-saving capacity of email and texting and telegramming. The pandemic was a huge jump for many people into a world of digital communication, which is, and can I just say, a bugbear of mine. I absolutely do not believe that we should ever use the word virtual about anything like this. There is nothing virtual about our conversation. I can see you more closely and see your eyes more closely, and you can see mine than you could be if we were in a room together. We may be digital, but we are not virtual. And there's a gift in digital communication where we can make disciples, we can enable people, we can help, we can grow people in the faith, we can learn, we can connect around the global village. Artificial intelligence brings all of that. But there is research that seems to evidence that there are many aspects of AI or advancement in technology that we have not fully investigated. Here's an example. If you and I were sitting in the same room, or we were in a room with 10 or 15 other people, it is a known psychological phenomenon that they can't explain, but it happens, that our neurological pathways will begin to mirror one another. So we will begin to relate into an event or a situation or a set of words. Some people call it the kind of the what's the word? The moment when a group can kind of consciousness, a group empathy towards something. It's a psychologically known phenomena. We mirror each other's psychological pathways, responses, and it becomes a very interesting space to discern what God is doing and what you're doing out of your human nature. So when you're in a room with somebody and they're telling you a story and they're sad, you're much more likely to cry with them. When they're happy, you're much more likely to laugh with them. But there are liminal spaces in our minds and in our pathways that enable that. When you're in a room that is a digital room, you and I do not have that same inherent connectivity. It has been scientifically shown that there isn't the same empathy in a digital space as there is in a physical space. And they don't know why. It might be something to do with quantum physics. I wonder whether it's something simply to do with the presence of God tangibly connecting us in a physical space. But there are aspects of digital life, digital communication, and digital community which enhance and enable us to follow Christ. But there are aspects of it which can appear to enhance and enable us to follow Christ, but actually are not as effective as we might think. And if we as Christians can learn the art of chewing the meat and spitting out the bones with AI, we'll be in a good place. I am not one of those people that thinks throw the baby out with the bathwater. I have a bank card. I'll continue to use it. I have to say that when it comes to decisions around whether or not you do away with cards and you can scan your eye, or you can scan your thumbprint, or you can do something else, a voice recognition, or whatever it might be, so that you don't, in a digital cashless age, I do think we're getting into dangerous territory where we're giving away our identity, we're giving away our freedoms, and we are becoming part of a system which is not of, it's a cosmos which is different to the cosmos that God wants us to be in. However, we've addressed those things before too, and maybe we're coming to a space where there would be a really good opportunity for us to teach again about some of the prophetic insights of Scripture on some of these things. You probably don't remember this either, but in the 1970s and 1980s, there was a real excitement about end times teaching. There was an excitement about prophetic teaching. There was an excitement about when Christ would return, about what we could be ready for. Not the hype stuff, but there was a real excitement that sharpened people, that got them ready, that got them alert, that got them focused, that got them on their knees, that got them discipling. I think some teaching around this on issues like AI and gender and artificial and sexuality and finances and nationalism and the environment. I think there's a whole plethora of new big public theology issues that your generation are desperate to hear people preach about, and they'll give their lives for the big story of the gospel. But we need to not keep using the clothes of the 19th century or the 20th century to have these prophetic conversations about what the world can look like and what the gospel means into the 21st century. And we have some really important things to say about individuality, about choice, about personhood, about human dignity, about individuality, about freedom, about hope, about trust, about faith. And AI can't answer any of those questions, but good preaching, good teaching, and good prophetic ministry can.
So interesting how over time, I'm just thinking, people nowadays, where do a lot of people in this world go for answers? Google. That's a reality, Google. But we know the nature of Google. You get a whole diverse range of answers from a whole diverse range of voices, and it can be a very dangerous world. But we need to be there. When we
and that's the other thing, isn't it? We need to be in it, not on the outside of it. And I think you can be in the digital world, but not of the digital world. And I think that just as, there's no sphere of society. The Dutch Prime Minister, Abraham Kuyper, said 100 years ago, and I said some pretty nasty things too, but over 100 years ago, he said, "There is not one square inch of this planet over which Christ has not already proclaimed in a loud voice, mine." So if there is a digital world and we are not in it, then who is? And who's dominating that space? And who's going to bring a narrative of hope and grace and life and trust to it? The knack is being in it, but not owned by it. In it, but not driven by it. In it and not afraid of it. In it and actively engaging. But to do that, you also have to be able to critique it. You have to be able to say to people, be careful. Be careful of giving away your freedom. Be careful of where this could end. Be careful of the choices that this is making for you. Be careful of not only listening to your own echo chamber. That's happening already. It's really, you go onto Facebook, or you go onto TikTok, you go on to, are you allowed to say TikTok even? I don't know, because the Chinese are so involved in it. You go into any of these spaces, and people are listening to their own echo chambers. So they're already being drawn into narrower and narrower places of conviction by algorithms that are filtering out different voices. You've got to be very intentional about listening to different voices. And I have to say that I think evangelical Christians are some of the worst We only talk to people that we agree with. We only listen to people that we agree with. And as a result, our lives get narrower and narrower and narrower. Whereas, and I think it's because we're afraid that our faith is somehow fragile, like a porcelain doll, that if somebody touches it, it'll fall off the mantelpiece and break. But you know what? For 30 years, I've been saying that is not what my faith is. Christianity is robust. It can defend itself. You put it in the public forum and you compare it to Islam, to Judaism, to Hinduism, to Zoroastrianism, and it will stand the test. It will prove itself to be true. You put a Christian worldview into the public space and you argue for the Christian ethics of compassion, non-aggression, grace, mercy, forgiveness, restorative justice, fair economics, recognizing the inherent dignity of all people, seeing that disability is not a punishment from God, recognizing that gender, men and women, are made equal. You put us into that conversation around race, around economics, around violence, around control, around authority, and around digital space and learning. And Christianity will defend itself. We don't need to be timid. We do need to be confident, but we also need to be as wise as serpents and as gentle as doves.
Well, Shahir, I've got kind of two final questions, really. And it's not necessarily about AI, but very on this theme, because and about the good and bad things of tech. COVID, we all went to live streaming, and that was a way to connect our community. And now, we look across our congregations, and sometimes there's a bit of a blame put on live streaming, and saying everyone's at home in their PJs having bacon sarnies, and they should be here in the building. Do you think being together, present in a room, it means a lot, or is it okay if we have 50% online, 50% in building? Should we be encouraging people to meet in the building, or are you, any thoughts on that, really?
Yeah, loads. I mean, in the church that I led prior to coming to Dundonald, we were the first church in the country. This was, we're talking 2013, 2012. We appointed an online pastor. We were the first church in the UK to appoint an online pastor, and his sole job was to engage with people online. I've been using online ministry for 20 years. And I absolutely defend the legitimacy, the importance, the significance, and the value of online ministry, digital ministry. There are thousands and thousands and thousands of people that I have pastored or had an opportunity to engage with online that I have not met, who have encountered Jesus and who have grown in their faith. I write something, I'm on a little bit of sabbatical from it at the moment, but I write something called Night Blessings, and it's a little night blessing that goes out every night. Over 1.5 million people, when I was writing them, I'm starting again soon, read them. And of those people, around 37,000 have become Christians. So tell me that that's not worth it. Tell me that's not worth it. And I will say, you are absolutely wrong. During COVID, the first night of COVID, our grandson was born in 2019. And I started something called Night Prayer. And we did an online night prayer community every night for 100 days. Then we did it 5 days a week. Here we are 3 years later. We're still doing it 2 days a week. There's about 10,000 people a week join it, engage with it. They are praying for the sick. They are caring for one another. They are doing community. It is one of the most authentic Christian spaces in my life. But as our church family, we have a blend of both online and non-online gatherings. So we have discovered that if you're going to have a prayer meeting in the building or a worship space in the building, it's much harder to translate into a digital space. So there are some things that we only do digitally, and they are as valid and as important as what we do only online. And then there are, I beg your pardon, in the building. And then there are others that we mix. But we are reaching people who traditionally were called shut-ins through online ministry. We're reaching people. This is a true story. My sister is not a churchgoer. And she went through a lot of heartbreak and hassle. Our whole family did. But just as recently as 2 weeks ago, we were chatting about something. And in our Sunday morning service, we had had an update about our children's ministry, which is called Arrows. It was a service that was in the building and online. And my sister said, I really enjoyed that. I said, you enjoyed what? And she said, the little slot about arrows.
Wow.
I said, oh, right. And she said, I've been attending your church every Sunday for 18 months.
Wow.
So tell me that is not something that God can use, you know? Now, I do think that there are some people that use online ministry as an excuse for not participating in community. But I also know that there are people who use coming to church as an excuse for not engaging in community. They're sitting in the building thinking about their roast or concocting gossip or hatred toward another person. What's the difference? What's the difference between sitting at home watching a screen and not engaging with God, and sitting in the building and not engaging with God? And is it not possible that there are some people that actually engage with God more intentionally, more fully, and more transformatively in the privacy of a room? Are they to be told that isn't real, that isn't community? I do an online teaching slot every Sunday morning at 8:30. I've just finished going through the book of Daniel. Tens of thousands of people have engaged with it. They go back and reflect on it. They send me questions. I get about 2,500 to 3,000 emails a week, Jason.
Wow.
And these are after everything else is taken out. And it's mostly people that engage with ministry with me online, and some in the building. I mean, we have about 700, 800 people that would engage with us in the building. But mostly there are people from all over the world that are engaging. We have a congregation in England. We have a small group that meets with us online that doesn't even live in Ireland. Now, here's another interesting story. Tell me if I'm going too long, but I hope you're enjoying these. My daughter's called Riona. Our daughter's called Riona. She's our youngest daughter. And she was at Edinburgh University finishing a degree. And then she wanted to move to Glasgow. She's getting married in October, but she was going to Glasgow to work for a year. And she was looking for somewhere to live. This was back in September 2022. COVID had happened. Our ministry we grew like topsy through. I know lots of churches didn't, but we really grew. Our finances grew, our numbers grew, our depth grew, our encounter with God grew. We have not our growth has accelerated over the last couple of years. It hasn't stopped. But anyway, we were trying to find out where we could help Riona find somewhere to live. Meanwhile, there was a community that had linked. There was a couple that had linked to me because of my wider ministry. And they started engaging with Dundonald online. They then got together 20 or 30 other people and began pastoring them and supporting them. They now facilitate a Zoom room for us, which is an online connect group. Some of our small group ministry is online only. Some is in person, some is a blend. We let people choose that. But this couple contacted me and said, we would love to offer Riona somewhere to live. So my daughter, because of online ministry, ended up living with a couple for a year in Glasgow, and they'd never met her except through online ministry. That is authentic Christian hospitality. That is, we all have houses, we all have homes, we're sharing in them. And they have been remarkable to her. We have people come to us nearly every month who connected with us online, save up and want to come. There's a lady in our church who's on her own. She's single. She's an amazing woman. And she hosts people who come from all over the world to come and spend time with us because they want to visit their home church. Now, I know some people will say, you can't have a home church that's not in your own country because you have to be involved in one church. I don't know what they're talking about. You and I are involved in lots of different expressions of Christian community. And that theology of church is more rooted in Luther and Calvin than it is in Scripture. How many churches was Paul engaged with? If you said the Apostle Paul or the Apostle Peter, how many churches are you part of? That say, firstly, the one true church of Christ. But then Paul would say, I'm part of the church in Philippi. I'm part of the church in Galatia. I'm part of the church in Ephesus. I'm part of the church in Colossae. I'm part of the church in Thessalonica. I'm part of the church in Corinth. And actually, when he writes to correct them, they say he's not part of us because he's not here in a couple of those letters. And Paul says, excuse me, I founded you. I'm part of you. I pray for you. I'm part of you. I weep for you. I'm part of you. I suffer for you. I'm part of you. It's exactly the same principle. He's just arguing it from a a relational perspective based in writing and in visiting briefly. Well, how many churches can you be part of? You can be part of lots of different local congregations. So long as you have your roots in a community, so long as you have accountability and shepherding, it is more than possible to be actively engaged in lots of different expressions of faith. I'm involved in Elim. I'm involved in Spring Harvest. I'm involved in the Baptist movement. I'm involved in dozens of different communities, all of which are Christ honoring and are in one way or another part of his body. So the idea that virtual, I hate that word, as you know, and I use it pejoratively, virtual isn't as important as actual, is rooted in wrong premise anyway, because there is no such thing as virtual. Everything is actual. The idea that digital and building are not as important as each other or can't work together is for the birds. And I tell you something, you see the people that are exiting some of the stuff that we've learned around artificial intelligence and broadcasting and electronic media. We are already beginning to say we should already be beginning to say, have you learned nothing? Have you learned nothing from what's happened in the last couple of years? Are you just ignoring the fact that God opened a whole new ministry field to you and you're now closing it down because it's easier to go back to what you used to have? That's like the Israelites saying we'd rather have the cucumbers and the garlic in Egypt. It's crazy. That doesn't make sense to me. Does that answer your question?
That is honestly absolutely incredible. It's so encouraging because, I'm going to ask you one final question. Literally is a final thought for pastors or churches as they seek to look at this world. But overviewing our conversation, it's an interesting world. It's a fast developing world, and to make sense of it and to understand it, it's great to pause and reflect. And what I'm getting a sense from you is we've got to be careful. But also, it has helped us over the years and it will continue to help us. But it is that sense of being careful, think of ethical considerations and putting parameters around it and a whole load of stuff, really. What would be your, I guess, final thought, if people are like, wow, I'm really intrigued, or, I've got more questions. What would you say to people, as they're unpacking this whole world of AI and tech broadly and how Christians could use it? What would your final encouragement be?
Well, I would say to them, talk to some other people about it, get involved in some discussion groups. Don't be afraid to look for a group online that you could have a conversation in. I mean, maybe you could facilitate that. I'd love to be part of that kind of community that is being innovative and creative and excited about it. There's a guy actually in the States called Paul Taylor. I'm just checking my notes here. And he worked in tech. He worked in AI for years. And he became a pastor in a place called Pennsylvania Bible Church. And one night, he came in after having me out for dinner, and he went into his living room and he said, "Alexa, turn on the lights." And in a moment, he had a revelation that was a very God thing to do, because God said in the beginning, "Let there be light." And he asked himself, how am I helping people engage positively with technology without it becoming their God? And he ended up setting up a series of podcasts called allthingsnew.tech. And that's a great space to start. Listening to the podcasts that you have done would be a great start. Reading some literature on it. Maybe, I think we're talking about having some kind of conference. I know in my work as a public theologian, my academic discipline is public theology, practical theology, and pastoral theology, and where they meet. And as you know, I lead the Elim public theology work globally. This is on our radar, and we are going to be doing some really interesting work around it with some podcasts and interviews and articles and blogs and discussions. But I would say to people in a simple way, Jason, ask yourself this: in the use of, in the engagement with, in my relationship with technology, does it bring me, there are a couple of questions. Will it bring me closer to Christ? If it will bring you closer to Christ, then it's a good thing. The devil doesn't want you to get closer to Christ. Are you obsessed with it? If you're obsessed with it, it's not a good thing. Are you serving it, or is it serving you? Make sure that you're being served by it, but you're not serving it. And will your use of AI help you to advance the kingdom of God. Elim has 4 key priorities: making disciples, planting churches, building or releasing leaders, and reaching nations. Is there a place in those 4 objectives for the use of technology? Raising leaders? Of course there is. Think of the money we save, the money we can plow into mission instead of getting on planes going everywhere. Planting churches? Of course there is. We can be meeting in spaces without getting there and creating community. Raising disciples? Well, all you have to do is look at some of the apps that we have now around reading and discipleship and accountability and turning sermons into notes and prayer triplets and all kinds of things. And reaching nations? Of course there is. So ask yourself those questions and allow yourself to be vulnerable enough to say, actually, I can use this for the advancement of the kingdom. I can use it without being used by it. I can have a relationship with it that brings me closer to God. And I can see it as an opportunity to develop as a disciple.
Amazing. Thank you so much for all your wisdom, insight. Absolutely incredible. Thank you, Malcolm, today. Wonderful stuff. Thank you so much, Malcolm. Such rich gold there. It's got us thinking. It's got us looking at our relationship of technology and how it relates to us as humans, how it relates to us and God. There's a pack full of information there, so thank you so much. Hey, this is a whole series of programs from Elim Digital, looking at the whole world of technology and the whole world of opportunities in front of us using the digital world and how we can use that for discipleship and evangelism. You can check out the full program list at elim.org.uk/digital. We've got some more sessions ahead, but for now, thank you for joining us today. That's Malcolm Duncan. Thank you once again, and we hope you have a great time. We'll see you soon for another Elim Digital session.